Rachel, please
Okay.
begin our meeting.
Thank you. I'd like to welcome everybody to Mercaz USA's General Council meeting. I'm so happy to see so many participants on this Zoom, yet it would be better to be in person. Over 80 people virtually is amazing. Today's meeting is going to be a combination. It's going to be a little bit of business, some stimulating discussions, thank yous to the outgoing officers and board, and a welcome to the new administration. And I'm going to just co-opt this personally for just 1 second before I introduce Saray to start the panel. Today's panel is Today's Zionist, Committed Yet Conflicted. It's something that I feel very strongly about. I was raised in a fiercely Zionist family. And right now my father is in hospice and we're sitting in his house and I'm surrounded by pictures of my father and my mother sitting and talking with David Ben-Gurion and posters of Zionist congresses and memories, which Sandy Starkman brought up a few days ago in another meeting, of being 10 years old and my parents taking 3 small children to Israel 2 weeks following the Six-Day War. There was no sense of conflict in how they felt about their Zionism, and things have changed. And today's conversation is really important. And I really would like to dedicate this to my father, Saul Silverstein. Saray?
Thank you, Rachel. And we hope your father stays comfortable and that things move in the best way they can. And our thoughts and prayers are certainly with you and your family.
Thank you.
And we thank you for being with us at this time. So today's panel discussion on this very important topic is composed of, there are 4 panelists. Dr. Yizhar Hess, who's a 10th generation Yerushalmi, and 3 Americans, all of whom are actively involved in the Jewish community and whose commitment to Zionism is beyond question. But they reflect our thinking today, and we believe that Mercaz, as a Zionist organization, needs to be addressing the issues of concern to people today. And so it's not about me, it's about the panelists. So I'd actually like to begin with Dr. Yizhar Hess, who, as I just told you, is the 10th generation Yerushalmi, who served as the CEO of the Masorti movement in Israel from 2007 to 2020. And then he got a big promotion. He was elected by the World Zionist Congress to be the vice chairman of the WZO, and we're very proud of that. And he is the senior representative of Merkaz Olami in the national institutions. You should know that he is a member of the Masorti Kehillah in Modi'in. So he is indeed part of us, as well as our representative. Yizhar, would you like to begin with a few remarks as to what this means to you?
Thank you, Saray, and thank you for the invitation. And you know, when I saw the headline or the title for this evening's session, Committed Yet Conflicted, when it comes to Zionism, I was thinking, hey, it's not only about people who live outside of Israel that are sometimes committed yet conflicted. It's also about me, a native-born Israeli of 10 generations, that in many ways, in some cases, feel both committed, but as much as committed, conflicted about the way that Zionism is implemented, in spite of the fact that Zionism was so successful. So I'm a proud Zionist, and I live the dream every day, but at the same time, I see the defects that are also in place when it comes to the implementation of Zionism, and I'm eager to fix them. So yes, committed, but definitely conflicted as well.
Okay. Rebecca Russo, who is the daughter of our chair, Rachel. So let's full disclosure here. She is the executive director of the Campus Climate Initiative at Hillel International, where she works collaboratively with college and university administrators and local Hillels across North America to ensure a positive campus climate for Jewish students. Rebecca has held various roles in the Jewish nonprofit and higher education sectors, including at Interfaith Youth Corps, Northwestern University's Fiedler Hillel, and UJA Federation of New York. She holds a BA in Middle Eastern Studies from Brown and an MBA from Northwestern University's Kellogg School of Management. She is a member of Anshe Emet in Chicago, where her husband is the assistant rabbi. So she too grew up in the movement and is still part of us. Becca.
Thank you, Saray, and thank you all. It's such a pleasure to be here and to see so many of my teachers and mentors and people I've known for a long time on this call, and I'm really thrilled to be part of this conversation. So as my mom said, Israel has been part of me and my family for my entire life. I won't reiterate everything she said, but I was raised with the fierce kind of Zionism that she was, both by my mom and by my grandparents. I was a life member of Hadassah from the moment I was born. And Zionism in Israel has always been in my blood and a strong part of who I am. And when I took a class on the psychology of the Arab-Israeli conflict at Hebrew University in 2003, during the height of the Second Intifada, I realized for the first time that what I had grown up with as a Zionist was a narrative. And it was true and it was real, but it wasn't the full truth. It was a Jewish narrative of a people who returned to our homeland, who flourished after persecution, who made the desert bloom, who built a thriving, beautiful Jewish civilization where one had not existed for thousands of years. And I learned at that point when I was in this psychology class that there was another narrative, a Palestinian narrative, a narrative of people who had been living in that same land for centuries, many of whom had fled or were displaced and who had experienced hardship and who experienced this place that was so important to who I am in a very different way. And I realized that they had been absent from the narrative that I grew up with. And so since that time, my relationship with Israel and with Zionism has been one of continued love. I will always love Israel. It is deeply part of who I am. And it's also been one of ongoing learning and listening and of wrestling. And very much the idea of committed and conflicted resonates with me very much. And to me, those go hand in hand, much as my love of the United States and my wrestling with policies and the US government and how the direction our country is going, much as those go hand in hand, that's how I see my relationship with Israel as well. And I'm really grateful for programs like this one today that I believe are helping our community move away from what we have seen in the past as a zero-sum game paradigm, where we either are pro-Israel or pro-Palestinian, where we either love Israel or we criticize Israel, and towards one of embracing the complexity and seeing that wrestling and that conflictedness is one of the ways that we can live out our love for Israel. And the last thing I'll say is that I believe really strongly that as supporters of Israel, we need to be committed to supporting Israel's Palestinian neighbors as well, for two reasons, both because Israel's future depends on it. I believe that Israel will not be secure, will not have a future if we don't also think about Palestinian future and security. And also because I believe our Jewish values and the soul of our people depend on it. And so being Zionist today means holding on to my love of Israel, embracing that commitment to Israel, and also holding Palestinians and their future in my heart and in my commitments at the same time.
Rabbi Ashira Konigsberg is the Chief Operating Officer for the Rabbinical Assembly and the Chief Program Officer at the United Synagogue of Conservative Judaism, two very important jobs for the future of our movement and the future of the American Jewish community. Rabbi Konigsberg graduated with an MA in Talmud and Rabbinics and Rabbinic Ordination from the Jewish Theological Seminary. She's a native of South Florida. She spent her undergraduate years at the University of Maryland and has spent many summers in a variety of different roles at Ramat Darom in Georgia. She is currently a member of both the board and the steering committee of Kehilat Hadar, an independent minyan. You might also want to know that she also volunteers as a disaster spiritual care chapter coordinator and disaster action team member for the New York City region of the American Red Cross. I don't know how you manage to have time to do all of this. And we're eager to hear what you have to say, because we know that you have some very strong opinions and we want you to share them with us now.
Thanks so much, Saray, and thanks to everybody who's taken time out of their Sunday to be on this meeting with Mirkaz, and thank you to my fellow co-panelists. It's lovely to be in conversation with all of you. So I want to be really clear that Zionism is about the support for the existence of a place for Jews in Israel, and I think that no one on this panel is conflicted about that there should be a strong and safe state of Israel for the Jewish people. I think where it gets complicated is what it means to have our own place in the Middle East, what it means to govern there, what it means that there's other people who also live there too, namely Palestinians and others. And I think that part of the context that I want to bring to this conversation is that as a people, we've been through a lot. And so Zionism evolved way before a Jewish state. It was about the yearning and the hope. It came to a crescendo after the Holocaust, when it was so clear that if we Jewish people didn't have a place to be safe and to be strong, that we were very much in danger of being wiped out. And then lived through the fulfillment of that dream of having a Jewish state in the homeland of Israel. And I think people who came up in the framework of remembering a fragile and new Jewish state at the very beginning have a very different worldview than people who came up with the time that I grew up, which is growing up with a strong Israel. I learned in history about all the wars that Israel fought for its existence, but growing up, the only wars Israel fought were wars of its own choosing. And I think that the community of people who came up with a different kind of Zionism, we were talking past each other. So it wasn't okay to raise questions, because that was about questioning the existential existence of the Jewish state. And so when the experiences are categorical, when it's all or nothing, when either you support Israel or you don't support Israel, there's not really room to raise questions, to raise concerns. And I remember very vividly, as I was in high school age time, and religious pluralism is an issue that's very near and dear to me and many of us on this call in Israel. And I would ask questions about how this state, this homeland for all Jewish people, right? Liot am chofshi ba'artzenu. We should be a free people in our land. And it didn't look so free to me. Rabbis aren't free to perform religious ceremonies. The Kotel is not a free place for me to daven the way I would choose to daven, etc. And at the time when I'd raised those concerns, and I think things have started to change, but at the time I was, the answer was basically Israel's under existential threat from Iran. So we can't question her right now. We have to support Israel with everything. And I think that what we see now is that the turnaround point or the end point of what that leads to, which is if you can't question at all, then unfortunately people say that this isn't for me. And so I think we've seen in some communities people saying, well, if being a Zionist means not questioning Israel, then I can't be a Zionist. And that's really, really sad to me to watch. But I also think that as sad as it is, our community needs to think about what we've contributed to that problem and to why people want to opt out of the conversation. So we'll talk a lot more about this, I'm sure. That's just a little preview of where I'm coming from. But I think that what I most importantly want to bring as a takeaway to this panel is that questioning Israel, questioning decisions that the Israeli government makes is not the same as questioning whether there should be a state in the Middle East for Jewish people. I think that is super important, but with that comes responsibilities. And I think that it's all of us who are invested in that state have responsibilities to do the best we can to make sure that our values and Jewish values are reflected in that state.
Thank you. And Richard Moline. Richard is an assistant vice president for Israel education at the Jewish United Fund, Jewish Federation of Metro Chicago, where he works with educators and directs the work of Israel Now, a program that brings hundreds of public school students from Chicago to Israel every year when there isn't a pandemic, and is now expanding to communities nationwide. Rich has strong ties to the conservative movement, having worked in various capacities at USCJ and the National Ramah Commission for over 30 years. He's a past international president of USY, a past president of JYDA, and a recipient of JEA's Or Zarua Award. He is a founding member of Matovu, an egalitarian congregation in Chicago's West Rogers Park neighborhood, where he lives with his wife, Joni Crowns. And he has a son, daughter-in-law, and 3 adorable grandchildren living in Yerushalayim. So he has a very vested interest in this. Rich.
Thank you, Saray. Thank you so much. And Boker Tov, Tzarayim Tovim, wherever you are, maybe Erev Tov if you're calling from Israel. It's so nice to be here. I want to first, of course, like any good Jewish speaker, say a few words before I speak and say Mazal Tov to Marilyn Wind and to Richard Helfand and to the board and officers of Merkaz USA. And I see that I have an aunt and uncle out here, Sheldon and Gloria Moline, so I just want to give them a shout out before I start. We've been given about a minute or so to make a statement on what it means to be a committed and conflicted Zionist. And I thank you, Sari, for giving us a minute, which means we've all taken 2 or 3. I'm not going to disappoint on that score either. I just want to point out, first of all, that as Rabbi Konigsberg mentioned so well, that all of this is rooted in Ahavat Yisrael, a love for the state of Israel. And those are 2 very loaded words. Ahava is a love is a very complicated emotion. And Yisrael, as you know, means to struggle or to wrestle with God and with humanity. So when we talk about Ahavat Yisrael, it's not a simple statement. It's really a very complicated, very nuanced endeavor. And I know that we all realize that, and I appreciate that. My first observation is to say that one cannot be a Zionist, and one can never be a Zionist without being conflicted. Jewish history is full of internal and external conflicts. All you have to think about is Moshe and Korach, or Hillel and Shammai, or the Sadducees and the Pharisees, or the Hasidim and the Misnagdim, or the Sfaradim and Ashkenazim. You can fill in the blanks. In Zionist conflict, think about Herzl and Hada'am, or Jabotinsky and Weizmann. Religious Zionists, revisionists, labor Zionists, political Zionists, cultural Zionists. I could go on, and so could you. I mention this because conflictual Zionism, which is a term I just invented and you're welcome to use, is nothing new. Ben-Gurion and Begin hated each other. Can you imagine a state of Israel without the contributions of both? So I know we're about to do a deeper dive into all of this, but I want to stake my place here is one who looks at the lonely position of being a liberal and a Zionist in North America as both troubling and healthy. Being a committed and conflicted Zionist is as old as Zionism itself. Only the challenges have changed. And that's our job today, I think, is to really think about how we meet those challenges. And I'm looking forward to discussing this further. One last point, and that is I look at Israel as my family. I love my family unconditionally. I would imagine that sometimes, you'll forgive the vernacular, sometimes I piss them off. And sometimes they make me angry. Not often, thank God it doesn't happen, but it happens in families. We can all think about that. That doesn't mean I don't love them any more than I love them now or I will love them in the future. And that's Israel, because Israel is in the DNA of the Jewish people. And that's where the conversation has to start. Thanks.
Thank you, Richard. So, first of all, do any of the panelists want to respond to anything else, to anything anyone said? And
I love the new paradigm that Rabbi Moline just brought. Conflictual Zionism, it's brilliant.
First of all, don't promote me. I'm not a rabbi.
well, I mean, he got promoted by Pesach Lerner this morning. So, yeah, speaking of that, I just wanted to add that this seems like a very timely discussion because there were 2 pieces that have appeared in the paper today. There's the piece in the New York Times Magazine on the unraveling of liberal Zionism, which many of us read online earlier in the week. And there's Pesach Lerner's piece in the Jerusalem Post attacking a now promoted Rabbi Yitzhar Hess, who seems to have gotten smicha from the Haredi this morning on our positions in Israel. And I think that these 2 pieces actually talk about the 2 issues that are of concern to us. as conservative Masorti Jews, that we feel conflicted on two different pieces, on the politics. And I would suggest that liberal Zionism is not unraveling. If anything else, I think it's gaining in strength. And the other piece is the religious piece. And both of those are of concern to us at the same time. And both of those are issues where there's conflict and where there is serious commitment on our part. So anyone want to comment and take it from there? Do you agree that there are two issues on the table, and there are probably many, many more, but that those are really two different directions that are of tremendous concern to us and to our movement? Rabbi Konigsberg, any comments?
Sure. So I want to kind of zoom out a little more even and ask about how I think culturally we're at a time when binaries aren't serving us so well. I think if you look at what's happening, at least in the US on gender, having a binary not so seen as the way people identify anymore necessarily, and doesn't really fit the scope of people. And I think that that's true on many things about identity, or, yes or no, in, out. And I think Zionism is in the same boat, where by creating a binary, you're a Zionist, you're not a Zionist, you support Israel, you don't support Israel, we actually end up making people choose which side of that where they fall. And I think we've forced people out on some level because, you have to accept all of it or none of it. And so it's not serving us well. I think that this is true in Israeli society with religious pluralism, right? Either you're Jewish or you're not Jewish. Either you're like in the government, you're out of the government. You're Dati, you're Chiloni. And I think that this falls in the political sphere as well. And I think what we're hearing in the article about rabbinical students is we don't want to play this game. Like if we have to say like we're in, like we're not, like in or out isn't a helpful framework for us. And so we've lost people to the conversation. And I think our conversation is poorer because of it. So that's a little reflection on what you said. I see other people kind of looking like they want to talk.
Okay.
The reality is that's the world we live in, unfortunately, right? That things are black and white. And we see it evidenced in American politics. We see it evidenced really all over the world. And one of the challenges that we have is that certainly in Israel and certainly in Zionism, there is no black and white, unless you're talking about Mea Shearim, I guess. But there is really, there are so many nuances and so many gray areas and so many places that we really need to examine with a microscope, and it's hard to do in a world that looks at things and you either for us or against us. So I agree with you, but I think the challenge is to be able to meet people where they're at with it, and not simply say it doesn't apply anymore.
I wonder what it would look like for us to take our movement's strength of sitting in the gray and not being part of the black and white on the religious pluralism piece, and to apply that to the political piece. And obviously those are two very different issues, but as you were saying that, I was thinking about how we, whereas there is a black and white divide on religion in Israel, our movement sits in the gray and tries to open up that conversation and create space. And is there a similar role that we could play as we think about opening up space on the political end too, and being in the gray space there? So that's just a piece to think about. And then I wanted to respond to what you said about family, Rich, because it relates to something that I've been struggling with, and I think this New York Times article really highlighted too. So I see Israel also very much like family. And when I have issues with my family, which are also thankfully few and far between, we handle them between us. I don't criticize my family publicly, and I wouldn't. And so I think this is where it gets very challenging around issues related to Israel too. And I think this is what the rabbinical students letter brought up, is how do we criticize Israel or wrestle with Israel within our community? And then how do we also do that or not do that publicly? And what does that dynamic look like? I think it gets even more complicated. And if we apply the family dynamic, how does the family metaphor extend in that direction, or does it?
Well, building off that question, I think that like ideally in a good functioning family, everybody wants to be a part of it and sees everybody as a part of it. And I think part of why it's feeling maybe different is because I'm not sure that it's all going in all directions that everybody wants everybody in. And I think that's also part of the dynamic. And we know that when families don't engage well with each other, that's often when the dynamics play out, not in private. And so I think that like everybody has to want there to be a discourse in order for that discourse to happen constructively and maybe less in the public sphere.
These are conversations. Go ahead, you sir. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was thinking about the metaphor of gray, and I'm not sure that it's gray between the black and white. Sometimes it's colorful, and I think it is an advantage to try to see the colorful space between black and white, and to see how could it benefit us to redefine the new Zionist ethos that definitely needs to be created here. You know, I'm the only Israeli on the panel, and I see Zionism from the very intimate perspective of living it on a daily basis. You know, I was born in Israel. I speak Hebrew. This is my mother tongue. I even dream in Hebrew. This is something that I do very naturally. Having said that, I think in the very first decades of the state of Israel, it was quite obvious for the education system in Israel to educate its pupils that there is no meaningful Jewish life outside of Israel. That was the ethos. It was the ethos that we were raised by, that meaningful life of Judaism, it's only in Israel. And in the diaspora or in the exile, it's something different. And I think that one of the things that Israeli society is growing up to is an understanding that we in Merkaz Olami and in Merkaz USA and everywhere in the national institutions, we try to promote that not only there is more than one way to be Jewish, but also there is more than one way to be Zionist, and there are meaningful ways of being Jewish outside of the state of Israel. It's no longer only one center, but Israel is successful enough to say that there could be very meaningful way of Jewish life outside of Israel, and this is a way of redefining an ethos for Zionism today in Israel. And it's so different than the Zionism that I grew up into when I was a child. And this is, for me, an example to see that within black and white, that are many colorful opportunities. And I'd like to add another thing, Rebecca, to what you said. You know, I'm a liberal when it comes to politics. Okay, it's hard to stand to my left. Yet, I think that it's really it's a difference between Israelis talking about their political left and right views vis-a-vis people who do not live in Israel talking about these very same things. So I'm encouraging, always encouraging Jews that live outside of Israel to be as vocal and as blunt as they can and should about the Jewish identity of this country. I think when it comes to the peace process and when it comes to other things, I'm not that certain. Again, I'm not against, but I'm not that certain that a very vocal voice that would call Israel to do this or that is in place. And by the way, the majority of the people who changed the Israeli political scene when it comes to right and left are the right-wingers. They invested millions, if not billions of dollars in changing Israel's political climate to be more to the right. So I say it to both sides at the same passion.
So I just want to respond to that for a second. First of all, if you're in the center and everybody moves to the right, pretty soon you're on the left. And so that's how I think that partially how we receive that designation. And it's a function of our, it's hard to be a centrist. It's much easier to be, right wing or left wing in the extreme. So that's always been a challenge for the conservative movement, no less so in the state of Israel. And the discussions that you refer to take place every day on the streets in Israel. And we're reluctant to have them here, and there's no reason why we shouldn't have them here. But I also think that we have to understand that we look at the world with very different lenses. right? That we're not living in Israel. We're not dealing with what some might say is an existential threat on a daily basis. I don't believe that's the case, but some might say that. We don't live with the understanding that a missile might drop into somebody's backyard. We don't live with the the culture that Israelis live with every day. We're in a very different kind of bubble here. So it's very easy for us to be pundits, but that doesn't mean we should be silent. I mean, if Israel views itself, as every prime minister has indicated, and I think that they have I think they have a legitimate right to say this, but if they look at Israel as sort of and these are my words, the protector of the Jewish people worldwide, then that means, in representing the Jewish people worldwide, that means we should have the same voice, or as close to the same voice as everybody else has when it comes to Israel.
So,
Well,
yes, Shira, go.
no, just so building off what Yishar and Rich are saying, I think the tragedy of it all is that there are many young people who don't feel more at home Jewishly in Israel than in other places. Personally, and I've said this publicly and in front of Israeli government ministers, I feel more Jewishly alive and able and better about my Judaism in New York City than I do in Jerusalem. It doesn't have to be that way. Hopefully with the new government, it won't be that way. That's what our sisters and brothers in Masorti and all over are fighting for in Israel. But in the meantime, it's true. And it's true that, you know, for egalitarianism, for feeling, you know, able to have diversity of practice, New York is, and I think other places in America too, are much better for that than in Israel. And so I think it's sad to me. I don't want that to be the case. But as long as it is the case, I think like it's hard to get next generation folks invested in what it means to be part of Israel if it doesn't feel like Israel as a country, as a political entity, at least under the previous government, like wants us all that much. And that's a sad thing to say. And I think it's only recently that our organizations, our institutions in the States have been willing to say it. But it doesn't make it less true.
Sure. So I've heard you say, and I heard you say to government ministers that you feel more Jewish in New York. And I certainly understand what you're saying, being a New Yorker. And in New York, we are blessed with many varieties of Judaism, all of which are totally acceptable and treated equally. But, you know, when I'm in Yerushalayim and, you know, and when I'm in the rest of Israel, people are speaking Hebrew. The calendar is the Jewish calendar. The Chagim are the Chagim of the Jewish people. So is there a difference between cultural and religious? And what impact does that have? That, yes, in a lot of ways, I wish that Israel would do things differently. I certainly feel that way about the United States as well. And, you know, and have no problem with public criticism. I grew up with the notion of public criticism being okay. But what does it mean culturally? And if you take away some of the issues, and I'm not minimizing the issues, but, you know, the Kotel was never meant to be a Beit Knesset. And in fact, I would argue that the Kotel Mishpachti is the place that is actually the nicest for any kind of celebration because it's private. And in the other places, it doesn't feel like a kihila, that it's a lot of people and it's a connection with Jewish history. But what about, you know, when I go to shul in Yerushalayim, I choose where I go. Now, granted, I'm not dealing with the issues of conversion. I'm not dealing with the issue of marriage. But in the day-to-day life, how does that play out?
So two things. First of all, there's places that feel multicultural and there's places that feel monocultural, or that there's a primary culture. And personally, I mean, I chose to live in New York City, so I prefer the multiculturalism of it. I think Jerusalem could be a multicultural place, but I don't think that's the current culture. There are other people who come through Jerusalem, that is true, but there's not a value of multiculturalism, and there's plenty of other aspects to Israeli society at the moment that are hard for me personally. So I'm not bothered by the existence of Halloween or that my kid knows that it exists. I'm not bothered by seeing Santa Claus. I know people are. I'm not bothered by like that I live in a country that, you know, that the culture, the primary culture is not Jewish. I would love to live in a place that the primary culture was Jewish and but there were lots of other people around. Probably New York City is actually the closest you get to that, to be honest. But in any case, like it's not just the religious freedom, it's also the political freedom, the ability to kind of to really intermix. Um, it doesn't, to me, the times that I've lived in Jerusalem, it doesn't feel, it's not the same kind of comfort. I'll give another example. This isn't a New York City-based example, it is a New York State-based example, but we were up in Ithaca for the summer. Ithaca is a conservative shul, and it has a small Orthodox minyan that meets on campus. And I have to say, both welcomed us with very open arms. And the Orthodox minyan invited me to give a drasha. I wore my talit there with nobody blinking at all, in a way that just Judaism in America, in theory, not everywhere, not all the time. I'm sure there's plenty of synagogues that I couldn't wear a talit in, but many places like have a more open understanding of individual diversity and practice. And so we felt really at home. And I don't think that I would like walk into any synagogue in Jerusalem that I didn't know already would be okay and do that. Personally, I wouldn't feel comfortable or free to do that. And so I think that it comes back to this kind of binary nature of thinking that is, especially in Israel, but not only, that either, you know, either you're one of us or you're not one of us. And if you're not one of us, then you don't fit in here. And like, why did you walk through the door? And like, what are you trying to do? As opposed to a community of people who are like, oh, cool, more Shomer Shabbat people in Ithaca. Like we can, you know, have some Shabbos meals with some more people and we can expand. And this is during COVID, right? Like where people weren't even so opening to strangers at all. So I have to say that like coming from that environment, when I visited Israel this summer and like the 3 weeks when you could do that, it doesn't feel as home to me. It feels scary. It feels threatening. It feels like if I go to the mikvah, they're gonna turn me away because I'm like wearing pants and not covering my hair. So I don't feel free there. And it's not only about the kotel, it's really about my profession isn't acknowledged, my peers aren't paid equally for their work, and the country is like set up in a systemic way to keep that kind of diversity away.
I just say I find that understandable, but a bit myopic, in the sense that it depends how we're defining our own Jewish identity and Jewish comfort level. You know, to me, when I buy a bottle of Coke and it says Chag Sameach, or I see what day of the Omer it is on a bus, or the totally non-observant clerk at the Makolet wishes me Shabbat Shalom on Thursday night. To me, that's a level of comfort and understanding and immersion in Jewish life that I don't find here, nor should I. So I think a lot depends on how we define ourselves Jewishly. I agree with you 1000%, and that is that there are struggles within the, for lack of a better term, religious world that are very troubling to us as Masorti Jews. But I would also say that if there was a demand from the Israeli public for this, it would be a much different kind of discussion. And we have to understand that, again, we're looking at this with very different lenses from what's happening there. So it's real and it's there, but you know, there are other aspects for me to look at Jewish life in Israel to really feel comfortable and at home.
So I hear you, Rich, but I'm going to push back in two ways. One is, yeah, sure, the Israeli public doesn't necessarily want it, but Yizhar can give us in a second, like how many billions of shekalim go to making that status quo of Israelis who don't see Masorti Judaism as a viable alternative supported by the government. So that's why the Israeli public doesn't see it that way. And like, it's possible that if those billions of shekels were diverted to Masorti communities, the Israeli public might have a different perspective. So that's, I think, like to say, like, it's as if it's not the public's will. I think there's a systemic thing going on there where that system needs to change because it's not the public's will. It's actually billions of shekalim annually. So I would challenge you on that point. And yeah, it's true, the buses don't tell me Chag Sameach in New York, but like plenty of store owners who aren't Jewish actually do say Shabbat Shalom. So I'm not really missing it. And like, if that's the thing I'm missing, okay, you know, like if I have to go to the, you know, a little further to get my lulav and etrog, like I can still get it here. So I mean, for me, it doesn't feel like a loss. And what I gain is understanding of a ton of other cultures, tons of other languages, tons of other cuisines, and like a great lifestyle where I don't personally feel uncomfortable in being Jewish or uncomfortable in being judged for my practice.
Yishar, will you respond to that?
Yes, I heard Ashira many times, and I love when she says it to Israeli politicians. Sometimes I even encourage her to say it because I know that this is something that they will be so stunned by, and it might help us. But Ashira, it's the first time that I hear you, and I feel, oh, she really thinks this way, and it hurts me. It hurts me not because you are not authentic in the way you think, but because I really want you to love Israel and to feel at home in Israel. I live in Israel because I love Israel, because I feel, wonderful in Israel. And I criticize Israel, every day more than you might think about a million things. But I have a sense of belonging. I feel it's my place to even to be angry with. I'm angry on something that is mine. And I think that this is something that comes with a sense of Jewish sovereignty. The fact that we have sovereignty, that we are the majority in the state of Israel, puts us in a place where when we have defects, it's our defects to fix. And what I'm trying, not so successfully, unfortunately, what I'm trying to convey and to touch when I'm talking with people who live outside of Israel, I would like to engage them with the battle that we have here. I think that our role in Zionism today is to engage as many Jews as we can that are living outside of Israel in helping us to make Israel a better place Jewishly, a better place democratically, a better place from a civil rights point of view, in any aspect. And for the Chalutzim who came to Israel in the first years of the country did a wonderful job. But I think that today's ethos of Chalutziyut is to help us reshape the country in a more pluralistic way. And I hope, Ashira, that one day you will be able to come to Israel and feel better on that. But it's our joint task to do.
You know I'm in that with you.
Rebecca, can you talk about what you're seeing on college campuses and how this discussion is playing out? I know you deal mostly with administrators, but what's the climate there? How are students feeling?
Sure. Yes, I'm glad to talk about what's happening on college campuses. I'd love to hear from Yishar also afterwards on what do you think some of the ways that we can do that as North American Jews are, and what are the most productive ways that we can partner with you to build a more religiously pluralistic society and to work on civil rights issues. As Rich said, kind of as people deeply invested and part of the project of Israel, but also as outsiders in some other way. So I'd love to continue that thread afterwards. In terms of what's happening on college campuses, I think this is where we've really seen, kind of coming back to the earlier threads of our conversation, a lot of increased Black and white thinking. And this has been happening on campuses for years and really peaked, as I think probably everyone here knows, or many of you know, peaked this past spring when the violence increased between Israel and Hamas. Anti-Semitic incidents on college campuses increased, and also, really inflammatory rhetoric about Israel increased on college and university campuses. I think there are a number of things at play. Part of this was the changing tide of American society last summer in the wake of George Floyd's murder, and the reckoning that we've had here with racial justice issues in the United States. What we've seen is a lot of misapplication of US racial justice paradigms onto the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, which, even if there are some shared similarities of what may be happening, it's historically inaccurate and sociologically inaccurate to just completely apply what we're seeing here in the United States to what's happening in Israel. And that's a lot of the rhetoric that we've seen on college and university campuses, which I think has made it very difficult for Jewish students who identify with Israel in some way, who love Israel, who are Zionists, who have really been pitted as the bad guy, and to put it really simply, but that's really what we've seen in a lot of cases, really a decrease in seeing this as a, from a political perspective, as a complex conflict with multiple perspectives, a lack of historical knowledge or accuracy, a lot of, from Ferguson to Palestine, seeing making equations between what's happening here and what we saw happening in Israel, and between Israel and Hamas. And it was a really challenging spring for college students. Not for all of them, not all Jewish college students support Israel, obviously, but for those who do, many of them found themselves hearing the word Zionists used as an epithet and as an insult without any knowledge, for the most part, of the people who were saying it, of what Zionism meant to Zionists and the many different strains of Zionism that we're all familiar with, and the complexities of those ideologies. So we've really seen a lot of simplification of obviously a very complex historical conflict into Black and white terms. And I think the most disturbing piece of this to me has been that whereas criticism of Israel has been happening on college campuses for many years, some of that criticism of Israel's policies, some of that of criticism of Israel's right to exist, what has really taken an ugly turn in the last few years, and especially this past spring, is the directing of that criticism to students, and to students who identify as Zionists, people really saying things like, if you're Zionist, you can't be in this club. If you're Zionist, you cannot run for this student government position. I mean, sometimes students are made to feel that way, and sometimes they are literally told those things by their peers on campus. And so that's what's been deeply disturbing to me, is really not moving away from, but going far beyond criticizing Israel or even its right to exist, but really turning it against students and making students for whom Israel to them is a religious connection, a cultural connection, a spiritual connection, a Zionist connection, as it is for many of us on this call, a familial connection. People have family living there, and making them feel that they don't have a place, certainly in progressive circles on college campuses, because of those feelings, which is really deeply disturbing. And it's not happening everywhere. I will say, obviously, there have been many news articles about this piece, and the most extreme examples get a lot of press. It's not happening everywhere all the time. We did a survey this summer of college and university campuses that I think helped us right-size some of the issues. And they're significant, but they're not as pervasive as it always seems. But, to me, US higher education should be the very place where students can express their identities and encounter other people that they deeply differ with. And that's unfortunately not what we see oftentimes on college campuses today.
So do you think this is part of our political climate, that it is unique to Zionism and to Israel, or that it is the nature of discourse in America today, and that we're playing into this in a role that is particularly hurtful to us and to the Jewish people?
I'm glad to jump in on that and would welcome others to weigh in. I think it's both. I think a lot of it is the nature of discourse in our country today, which has devolved in many ways. I know on campuses, I think there's not opportunity for really robust discourse from people who deeply disagree now as much as there was 10 years ago, let alone 20, 30 years ago and longer. So I think that's a piece of it. And I think that the Jewish community is seen in the United States today as white and privileged. And I think that that Israel is often singled out in ways that are deeply problematic. So I think part of it is the broader discourse, and part of it is the positionality of Israel and the way that Israel has been targeted in particular.
So I think this whole Rebecca Kolakavod, I mean, you really pinpointed it well. I think the whole question of intersectionality and where Israel comes into the discourse, and when it comes to issues of racial justice and gender equality and things of that nature, it has been totally co-opted by certain elements within the left. The attempt to delegitimize Israel and delegitimize Zionists is an attempt essentially to exclude us from the conversation. And I think we have a number of choices when it comes to that. We can either continue to try, or we can walk away, or we can keep fighting the good fight. We're not going to convince people who feel a certain way about things, but the kind of discourse we engage in and the language we use is going to be very important when it comes to that. For example, do we talk about settlements or occupied territory or administered territory? Do we talk about a separation wall or a security fence? All those kinds of things that we might not even think about in terms of our discourse are really important in terms of how we approach things. And so one of the things I think we need to think about is where we are as individuals in all of this. We're not going to solve everything, and it's not our job to solve everything, but as a community, a diverse community, and I know that we have a diversity of opinion here on this call, we need to come together at a certain point and say that we understand that, that there are conflicts involved in being a Zionist, but we also are committed to the safety and security and the existence of the state of Israel, and that should be the red line. And we need to be able to do that in order to confront these things. We can talk about this stuff amongst ourselves all we want, but until we're ready to make that statement and make it unequivocally, we're still going to have these issues to deal with.
I want to give some examples for things, Rich, that we do with that regard here from our side of representing Merkaz in the national institutions. In the last 3 months, we blocked the right wing and the right wing in KKL directorate from doing things that would block Israel from getting, when time comes, to two-state solution. And we did it on your behalf because we believed that these kinds of Zionist acts should be done on behalf of Zionism in order not to take the right wing take over Zionism and the Zionist ethos. Now, it's kind of nuanced that if you see it from the outside of Israel, everything looks, as one thing. Israel is wrong, and the other parts of the world are right. But sometimes you're right that you need to look at things in a way that would enable you to see the small things, the nuance of the complexity of the Israeli experience. And I'm frustrated in many days, but in some days I do remember that democracy that for years we were looking like kind of up to, it's the United States of America, had 4 troubling years just recently from a democratic perspective. And we were able, as much as you were able, to change the government in a way that would allow us now to bring more hope to the discourse. I'm so happy with the government that we have now, not because it's perfect, because I think that it sees more aspects of the discourse that we just put on the table. And it gives us a perspective that I'd like us to remember.
So there've
Can I
been,
jump in, Saray? Or
go ahead.
well, I want to agree with you, Sahar, and say that first of all, the language coming out of the new government is extremely hopeful, and actually a lot more complex than we've seen out of the Israeli government in quite a long time. And I think that that's a great thing. I think one thing that the Israeli government is finally saying, and I think that I would love the Jewish community to follow suit, is not just about the kind of language, Rich, that you were talking about like how we talk about settlements or occupied territories, but it's language about like Palestinians are people and they have rights and the current situation is not tenable. And like as the people the country that surrounds the areas in which they live, like we have responsibilities to try to fix that, even if we have no partner for peace right now. And PS, the Israeli government has taken the peace process also off their table, so it's not like, as much as we say there's no Palestinian partner for peace, there's also no Israeli partner for peace right now. So I think that like that shouldn't be a controversial thing to say, and it is. Like I'm even nervous about saying it in this group. It is. And people who've said it, students have said it, individuals who've said it have been reamed really hard in saying that their Zionism is seen as suspect, that by saying such things, they're not supportive of a Jewish state. And I think that this comes back to one of the things I was saying at the beginning, that the flip of like from being a vulnerable state to a strong state, I don't think we've changed our rhetoric necessarily or our permission to understand what responsibilities come with being a strong state of Israel. And unfortunately, especially in the last government, things happened that I don't think reflect our best Jewish values. And I think that as a Jewish community, we didn't do enough to call them out. And I think it's still a scary thing to say that. And I think that it's still not a safe thing to say that, because it's seen as going back to making the state of Israel like existentially vulnerable again. But I also think Israel is existentially vulnerable if it oppresses people who are their neighbors, and it's existentially vulnerable in a totally different way if it really becomes oppressors and if it really does treat people differently because of their identities. And so I don't think there's right answers. I was actually really hopeful to hear Prime Minister Bennett talk about the fact that Israel's on the cutting edge of certain things in terms of developing those values. I'm willing to give the new government a chance as it works all that out, and I hope that they're successful. I'm really seeing hope in that. But I also think that our role here as people who are very invested in the success of the Jewish state, I don't think we're successful if we're doing it in a way that leads to the oppression of other people. And the fact that that's a controversial thing to say still, it shouldn't be. As people who our Jewish history and our story should understand what that means. And I think that some of the Zionist education a lot of us received was incomplete, and didn't really pay enough attention to the fact that this land of Israel we were looking to reestablish, it wasn't empty. And we got to work it out. And the fact that there's not a good effort to work it out, the fact that those of us old enough to remember Oslo and what that hope felt like, and now how much it's been gone and for how long, it's really, really sad. And it's really, really hard. And we have to figure out a way to work that out, because the status quo is not sustainable. And I don't think it's the Israel we want Israel to be.
Yizhar, as the one Israeli on here, on this panel, you've got a big responsibility, because it's very clear to us, for a country that's had 4 elections in a very short period of time, that Israelis do not share one common view, and that there are a variety of different perspectives among Israelis, which I think we would all agree is a healthy thing. What's the story with the right? We know that the left is conflicted. One of the issues that was raised in the chat was, what about the right? Are there people on the right who share the sense of conflict, even though they're committed, and who are looking at different ways to deal with issues? How does that work? I mean, clearly, this government cannot be labeled as a left-wing government. It's a unity government. It represents a variety of different points of view, which sometimes conflict.
So the polarization of the political discourse in America does exist here as well. And I can see how many parts of the right-wingers in Israel, parties as well as individuals, are feeling horrible with the current government, are disgusted, they hate it, they feel that it took over the country in a way that they cannot tolerate. I know the feeling because I felt the same for so many years. So it's not new, but definitely it is very much something to feel. But I want to take the advantage, Saray, of you giving me the spot, and I want to say something about something that I do see that right-wingers in North America, Jews of the right wing in North America, do vis-a-vis Israel, and something that center and left people do not do. And this is the fact that so much money is invested, coming in donations from the right wing in North America in order to shape in Israel. We can see it in so many levels, like in a right-wing think tank of Shalem and Kohelet, like in purchases of land and real estate in the West Bank by the Moscovich family, by the fact that the Shedelson family created a newspaper, a daily newspaper that is giving for free to the entire Jewish public. And for the last 2 decades, the investments are so huge that it basically changed the political arena in Israel. When you say today that Israel turned to the right, it's also due to the fact that billions of dollars were invested outside of Israel in order to make sure that this trend happens. And this is something that I envy. I think that this is something that I would love to see our brothers and sisters in North America that do donate to various things, whether Jewish or not Jewish, understand that out of their love and care for Israel, or even for the fact that they want to see a different Israel, would take the opportunity that exists to help us shape Israel to be a better place. And this is something that it's a frustration that I'm taking with me in the last 15 years, And I know that here I'm preaching to the choir. You understand it as much as I do, but I still think that it's important that this notion will be said.
Okay, so before you make your final statements, and we will ask each panelist to make a final statement, Yizhar, there have been a lot of questions about what happened at the Kotel. And so since it's new, it happened on Friday. Could you just talk about that very briefly before we get to our final statements?
Yeah. So this Friday morning, Rosh Chodesh Kislev, the Kotel was very hectic. The level of violence was high, but the police did what they needed to do, so we didn't felt threatened. In spite of it, or with it, the ashers, the bullies of the chief rabbi of the Kotel, Rabbi Rabinovitz, were really violent with women of the wall, and it was felt very much. But you know, when such thing happen, it's not easy to be there with your feet on the ground. But for the discourse and for the change of the climate and for the fact that it becomes an important thing to be dealt with politically, it was a good Friday morning. Because ever since then, it's obvious that the Kotel agreement needs to be dealt again. I was corresponding today via WhatsApp with the Minister of Diaspora that is promoting a decision to come to vote in the next government meeting. I hope indeed it will come. And we know that before a solution, there are crises. And before sun is up, well, there is a nice expression in Hebrew, שלפני עלות השחר, החושך יותר גדול. I'm sure that some of you can translate it in a better way, but yeah, I'm optimistic. I think, Saray, that we are at a stage where we can at least talk about some solution to the Kotel that would be similar to what we had 5 years ago.
Okay, so final statements. Let's go in the order in which we began. Yizhar.
Yes, I would love to find a creative way to engage liberal Zionists or people who care to some extent for Israel to what we do. I think our challenge is to try to engage liberal Jews in North America, because we don't have much troubles with the others, and I care for the future of Zionism.
Okay, Rebecca.
I've really appreciated this conversation and hearing from all of you, and just want to amplify what Ashira said a few minutes ago. What would it look like to really create a space in our community where we can say that Palestinians matter and that their future matters and that Jewish Israel matters and our future matters, and to be able to hold those things simultaneously, and not to see that as a topic that we need to silence, but as something that emerges really deeply from our Jewish values and from our conservative movement Jewish values, to be able to hold the future and security of our people in our hearts, and also the future and security of another people whose future is deeply intertwined with ours, whether we want it to be or not, and to really see them as humans that are also deserving of a free and secure future, and to create space for those conversations. And as I said before, I really believe that our movement, as a movement that sits in the gray, that explores complexity, that approaches pluralism in the way that we do, I think we're really well positioned to be leaders in this. And I think today's conversation was a wonderful start, and look forward to finding ways to continue to expand these kinds of conversations going forward. So thank you all.
Shira.
I want to start by just thanking Saray and Mirkaz for hosting the conversation. Even that is a controversial thing to do at some point, and I'm sure there was even some wonder about if that was the right thing to do. I obviously think so, and really appreciate the opportunity to be in dialogue with my fellow panelists. If there's one thing I would ask people to take away from this, it's really about expanding the group of who is in and who is part of us. Look at, if you find yourself in disagreement, find a way to figure out, like, how are we still part of the same thing? We're coming from different places with different life experiences, with different historical contexts, but see the Ahavat Yisrael, see it as the love of Israel that it is, even if it's not how you or I or any of us choose to manifest it, this is the time to bring people close, not to push them away. And so as much as we can, all of us in each of our own ways, let's find ways to bring people close, even when it feels like it's not the thing we were expecting or hoping or the thing that we agree with. Our world needs so much more of bringing close right now.
Rich?
Thank you. I have to say, as a middle child, it's so rare that I get the last word. So I thank you for the opportunity, and thank you for inviting me. That's an honor. It's been an honor to be here. I've been told professionally and a lot that the students say, "Well, you lied to us, right? You didn't give us the full story," and it's a bit hyperbolic, and I don't think there have been lies in the way we've taught Israel in our movement, in our institutions, which are unabashedly Zionist, but we've been sloppy. Most of our teachers aren't trained well to teach Israel. We haven't given our kids exposure early enough in some cases. We haven't moved on beyond falafel when it comes to teaching about Israel. And we've been beyond sloppy in teaching about the Palestinian narrative and the multiple Israeli narratives that go with it. Some of which say, come hell or high water, that West Bank is ours and we're keeping it, and some of which would say that occupation is evil. I think there's something else that we have to put on the table, and that is what we can't solely blame our institutions. It's very easy to blame USY, Camp Ramah, Solomon Schechter, our synagogues. Where have our families been? What are we doing to instill a dialogue and a conversation within families, with parents about what it means to be a Zionist and what place Israel plays in our collective lives? Our students, most of them who even go to religious school, we'll leave day schools out of the conversation for the moment, but most of them who go to religious schools are in there for 5-6 years at best. A 10-year-old brain, even a 14-year-old brain, isn't hardwired enough to understand what the nuance is about Israel. And so where do we approach it, and how do we teach in the limited time we have? And I can tell you that professionally, when I work with religious schools in particular, and I talk about the fact that, we talk about how we teach Israel, when a child goes to afternoon religious school on the average of maybe 3 hours a week these days, right? And the bread and butter is bar bat mitzvah, and there's Hebrew, and there's music, and there's Siddur, and everything else. Where does Israel fit in? Some of them do the best they can. And I've had some educators look at me and say, we teach Israel in 5th grade. And I want to say, are you kidding me? Like 5th grade, it's not a unit. So I think we have a job to do, right? And the first thing we have to do is admit that we haven't been thorough. And then we have to correct course, because this isn't just a conversation of here's what they're doing to us. Here's what they're doing to us. This is aleinu. This is on us to be able to work and try and fix and try and correct course. So I think the future is there. I think the future is bright and committed. And as I said in the beginning, it's nothing new. The challenges are different. And I thank you for the opportunity in moving us forward on this.
So I would like to thank all of you for agreeing to be on this panel and for your words of wisdom, which are really appreciated. And to let you know that this is just the beginning of a conversation. That if I had to give you one word to describe what Merkaz is about, that word would be pluralism. And it's not just religious pluralism for which we advocate, but it's also political pluralism. It's a celebration of the idea that people are committed despite their conflicts and despite the differences in perspectives, and that there is a big enough table for there to be room for a lot of diverse opinions. And I want to announce that going forward, we will be working with our partner, Merkaz Canada, in producing a series of discussions that will continue throughout at least this year, and hopefully going forward in the future, where we can talk about many of the issues that were raised today and to delve into other aspects of this as well. And this is just the beginning, not the end of a conversation, because if we really care about Ahavat Yisrael, we have to create the environment in which we can have that conversation. And Merkaz wants to be that table. So we're working hard on making that happen. So thank you very much. And we will now move on to the business section of the program. So we hope you will all stay with us. For those of you who wrote in the chat box, please know that we are recording this, that we have all of your comments, and that we will read them again, and we will use them as we develop our programs going forward. And we want you to stay in touch with us. So I thank you for all of that. All right, I believe that our chair has had to move on for family issues. So the next piece of the program is the business section. And I'm going to call upon our president, Dr. Marilyn Wind, to take over the chair at this point. Marilyn? We got you?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay.
Okay, so the first thing on the business agenda is the financial report. And I would like to thank Stephen Steckler, our treasurer, and Stanley Wertheim, our accountant, for their service. I'm pleased to report that we're operating in the black. Our finances were put on QuickBooks, which I was very proud of. And then our bank changed their business platform into a platform that doesn't talk to QuickBooks. So we are in the process of switching over to another system. Both a first quarter report and a budget will be presented at the December board meeting, and you will have an opportunity to discuss them then. Our accountant has given me a report of our financial situation. Last year, we received an SBA loan, which was forgiven. And we are currently holding about $5,000 in funds from the sortie on campus. Other than that, we have absolutely no liabilities or debts. And we have about $90,000 in our bank account. And Saray informs me that she just got a check for $11,000, which will be deposited tomorrow. So we will have over 100,000 in our bank account. And that is the report for right now. Next is the nominating committee report and the elections. So I would like to call on Naomi Yadin Mendick for the nominating committee report. And I just have to say that Naomi and the nominating committee did a lot of work over the summer so that they could present you with an outstanding list of officers and board members. And they worked very, very hard in order to get this out and give the appropriate notice before the high holidays. So Naomi?
Okay, just let me ask one question. Do you want me to read the entire list of nominees?
Sure.
Okay, so first of all, I want to thank Saray and Marilyn for all their support throughout this process. They were really a terrific resource, gave great advice and some input, and also helped us to have some conversations with potential nominees. I was hesitant when I took this on, was concerned about the time constraints, but I have to say that I had a really amazing committee that worked so beautifully together. So the first thing I want to do is to thank my co-committee members, Ned Gladstein, Cindy Chassid, Rabbi Jay Kornsgold, Melissa Kerbel, Frank Kreutzer, Eric Lederman, Rabbi Adam Raskin, Eric Weiss. Yeah, that's it. We did send a letter out within the time constraints on September 2nd, 2021, the 25th of Elul 5781. We met between July 19th and August 31st. I believe, I don't know, we've met a lot of times. Anyway, sometimes we met twice a week off, but typically on a weekly basis. Very conscious of making this truly a working board, both in terms of the representation, the size, making sure that our board is more diverse. And it really is a process. Clearly, we're not entirely there, but we think that we made tremendous progress towards achieving those goals. So And to my knowledge, we have received no nominations outside of the committee's work. So without further ado, and this does not include the ex officio members. We do have a number of ex officio members, and that's all outlined in the letter that went out to our membership at large. So for president, Richard Halfand, vice presidents, Eric Lederman, Sandy Starkman, Rachel Russo, and Rabbi Jeremy Wiederhorn. For secretary, Rabbi Nolan Leibovitz, and for treasurer, Robert Sunshine. For board members at large, Ira Bartfield, Hetty Bellman, Julian Brook, Rabbi Elliot Dorff, Rabbi Daniel Dorsch, Rabbi Jerry Epstein, Rabbi Murray Esring, Gail Goldfarb, Lindsay Goldman, Diane Halivni, Rabbi Eitan Hammerman, Harvey Hershkowitz, Scott Kaplan, Rabbi Jay Kornsgold, Rabbi Noam Kornsgold, Bernie King Smith, Noah Kligfield, Rabbi Randall Konigsberg, Franklin Kreutzer, Cantor Sarah Levine, Richard Moline, Dr. David Reifler, Barbara Rossino, Gary Rosenthal, Jackie Saltz, Ben Siegel, Alan Silberman, Rabbi Alan Silverstein, Rabbi Hillel Skolnick, Richard Skolnick, Stephen Steckler, Tom Sudo, Rabbi Gordon Tucker, Michael Waterman, Eric Weiss, Martin Werber, Florence Wolpoff, myself, and Judy Udoff.
Could I have someone to second? I think that we just need somebody to approve the report that Naomi has given. And since we have no one who has put their name in to run for the board, I would request that we have a motion to accept by acclamation the report of the nominating committee. And I'm not sure, Howie, if you can see somebody. Oh, okay. So Julian Brook has moved that. Yes. And
Can we post the slate? We have the slide.
it was on there. Yeah. But Heidi, we in fact will post that on the website.
Oh, okay. I got it on my screen.
It's posted here for us to
It's
see, but
posted
once
here
the
also.
election.
No,
is
I
completed,
think,
Yes.
yeah, I
Yes.
think what Heidi asked is that it be posted on the Mercaz website, which we will do after the election so that everybody will be able to see the full list.
Right. Are there any objections to the motion? Hearing none, I would like to congratulate all the members of the incoming board. Okay. And posted that the new slate will be posted on the website in the next week or two. I'd now like to call on Rabbi Alan Silverstein to discharge the members of the board, the officers and members of the board.
Okay, thank you very much, Marilyn. Yashikov on such a wonderful meeting. In terms of discharging, we have a lengthy list of outgoing board members, which you see. We're very grateful to all the board members who served, and you strengthened Mercaz USA in countless ways and all kinds of subcommittees and extra work. And you are now discharged with our gratitude and appreciation. Thank you very much. Second group, although we're not discharging them because it's not in our hands, we express gratitude to ex officio vice presidents, Ed Gladstein, Deborah Cantor Goldrich, Alan Kahan, and Rabbi Stuart Vogel, presidents of the USCJ, Women's League, men's clubs, and the RA. The support of our organizations for Merkaz. Merkaz is the movement, so it's all the organizations, and your presidencies are a blessing to us. So thank you for your continued service. Third group are the elected officers who are outgoing. So we have Secretary Rachel Russo, Treasurer Stephen Steckler, who saw Stephen's wonderful work in the budget, elected Vice Presidents Rabbi Daniel Dorsch, Rabbi Eitan Hammerman, Richard Helfand, and Martin Werber. We're very grateful to all of you for your dedicated and effective service during Maryland's administration, and look forward to your continuing support for Merkaz USA. You are hereby discharged. And in terms of President, we're going to discharge Marilyn, but I first want to say a few things about the major impact that Marilyn has had. First of all, she came in with a lot of challenges. She reduced the staff to enable us to balance the budget, and she hired Saray, which was a home run in terms of quality and partnership between Marilyn and Saray. She worked to pay off Merkaz's substantial debts, balance the budget, and that was not easy. She procured new office space at literally half the cost of the previous space, which was essential to putting our finances in order. She put those finances online in terms of transparency and developed a new and much more effective database. She reinstated what unfortunately was a dormant Merkaz incorporation document in DC. So now we are appropriately legal and up to date. She initiated regular communications with the Merkaz USA board via Shabbat Shalom, focusing on what Merkaz and the Masorti movement groups who receive allocations due to Merkaz, what they are doing, and particularly how it relates to our work. And this was part of reaching out effectively to other parts of the movement, highlighted by a first time ever, a movement-wide committee for the election campaign, in which Marilyn was co-chair, which increased the votes for Merkaz by 50% as compared to 2015. Marilyn served as vice president of Merkaz Olami and also on the board of Masorti Olami. She represented Merkaz as a vice president on the AZM board, American Zionist Movement board, under very challenging circumstances, as a euphemism. They were She represented Merkaz at the Conference of Presidents and on the AIPAC National Council. She initiated programming along with Saray with Merkaz Canada, Merkaz UK, the Cantors Assembly, Women's League, and men's clubs. For example, the Merkaz Reads Israel program was with Merkaz Canada, Tu B'Shvat program with Canada, UK, Successful Purim program with Canada, UK, Federation of Men's Clubs, and Women's League. And Saray and Marilyn together worked very hard in the AZM to build a coalition for us with Artza, Amenu, PPI, and sometimes Amit. And this enabled us to prevent the takeover of the AZM by an increasingly aggressive ultra-Orthodox and right-wing bloc. Much more could be said, but suffice to say, Marilyn, Toda Rabah, you did a great job. We are profoundly appreciative to you. And I want to congratulate Richard Helfand, your successor. Richard, congratulations to you and to your slate. And you are, well, Marilyn and her team are officially now discharged.
Thank you so much, Alan. Thank you for your kind words. It's been a pleasure working with you and working on the Merkaz Olami board. I want to take this opportunity to thank all of the members of the executive committee and those serving on the board. We couldn't have accomplished what we did without all of your assistance. The past 5.5 years has been interesting, frustrating, exhausting, and exhilarating. During my first year in office, I was in New York City weekly for days at a time. I thank my daughter Rebecca for hosting me in her apartment. Without this place to stay, I would not have been able to be there so much and so often. I also thank my husband Gary, who drove me to New Carrollton Amtrak and picked me up on my return every single week and accommodated to my being away for days or weeks at a time. He also accommodated to me being away at Jewish agency meetings for our anniversary for many, many years. So I thank him for that as well. Alan has basically spoken about most of the things that I was going to speak about, so I will not repeat what he has said. The other thing that I do want to point out is that we brought Masorti on campus under our wing in the past couple of years. Eric Leiterman, the head of Masorti on campus, was very helpful in pinpointing delegates under 35 years of age for our World Zionist Congress slate, where we needed those delegates in a specific order. And I'm very, very pleased that he will be a vice president in the next administration. As I indicated in the financial report, we're operating in the black. Do we need more money? Absolutely. You can all help by paying your membership dues, promoting Mercaz, and making donations to the best of your ability. Thanks to a generous donation from Judy and Mark Udoff, we have been able to get a new database that's actually intended for an organization like ours. Thanks also to Julian Brook and Bernie King Smith for advising us and helping us choose the appropriate database. I have to say that they knew the questions to ask, they understood the answers they got, and then they translated them for Saray and I into English so we can understand. So thank you to both Bernie and Julian. Having Saray working full-time, putting in an infrastructure and being responsible for the World Zionist Congress elections, as well as representing the movement at the AZM and all the other organizations where we needed to be represented, has been very challenging, but we learned a lot and accomplished a lot. Alan described the movement-wide committee that was put together that Saul Sanders and I co-chaired. And I think this was the first for the movement where we all worked together toward a common goal. Besides the increase in votes that we got in the last election, we learned how important social media is for getting our message across. And Howie Goldberg, who worked for the campaign as our media person, is now working for us on a very part-time basis. His support has been invaluable and is yet another reason why we could use increased funding. As Alan indicated, we only have one professional, but by collaborating with other arms of the movement, that has been the key to us being able to accomplish all that we've done. For those of you that missed the 4 Mercaz Reads Israel programs that we've put on, I want to recommend that you go to our Facebook page, Mercaz Reads Israel, where you will find the names of the books, questions for the books, and the discussion that was had about the books. This can serve as programs in your congregations with you doing very little work except going onto the Facebook page. Our next Mercaz Reads Israel will be in February. And then Saray has indicated to you that together with Mercaz Canada, we'll be having a Zionism speaker series, which will be continuing the topic that we began today. By partnering with the other organizations in the movement, we're able to accomplish much more than if we were doing it on our own. Additionally, as was demonstrated today, using the Zoom platform enables participants from all over the United States and speakers from Israel as well. And it managed to help us avoid the marathon in New York, which we usually end up having a meeting on the day of the marathon. This avoided us having to deal with it. Lastly, but certainly not least, I have to thank Saray. She works tirelessly and I believe knows every important Jew in the world, or at least in the conservative movement. Her expertise and knowledge have been invaluable and have enabled us to build the foundation for this organization to function in the 21st century. Richard Helfand has provided us with excellent advice and professional expertise throughout my administration. I know that the organization will go from strength to strength with him as the new president. Richard, I'm pleased to leave you with an organization that has a firm foundation upon which you can build. It has been my honor to serve as the president of Merkaz USA. Thank you, everyone.
And Marilyn, thank you for all that you have done. It's a little bit difficult from the perspective of being on Zoom to be able to sit here and thank you enough. But we at Merkaz wanted to give you a little token of our appreciation for all that you have done for the organization and for all of us the last 5 years. I understand that a package was delivered to your home. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
And do you have it with you?
I do.
Have you opened it yet?
No.
Okay, so we're going to do this together. For those of you who know Marilyn well, in addition to her family, which she loves, number one of anything in the world, there are two things that we know about Marilyn. One, she loves Yerushalayim. And number two, she loves dreidels. And in fact, she collects dreidels. So Marilyn, if you will open up the box that we sent you, we have a little token of our appreciation, a new dreidel that you can add to your collection.
Wow, this is beautiful. Unfortunately, I can see it.
And you may not be able to see, everybody may not be able to see, but
Yeah.
It is a dreidel of Jerusalem in sterling silver, and it's hammered out with the entire picture of the city of Jerusalem. So we hope you will add that to your collection with our appreciation and with the warmth that comes with it, albeit through the computer. And there'll be one more thing coming to you, but we'll deal with that afterwards because we also want to give you an appropriate stand and plaque to go with it to commemorate this special event. But we wanted to make sure that we got this to you before you left office. So thank you very, very much for all you have done for us. And I, for one, hope that you're sticking around so that you can be of help to me when I need it in my coming administration.
Thank you so much. This is an absolutely beautiful dreidel, and it will have a very prominent position in my collection. Thank you.
You're welcome. Saray?
Okay, so now we're going to call on Debbie Isaacs, who is the president of the American Zionist Movement, to install our new officers. Debbie?
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Okay, now I can see you all. I apologize that I look like I'm in sunglasses. My glasses turn dark when I'm outdoors, and I happen to be speaking with you from on the road. First of all, I want to thank you, Saray and Richard, for inviting me to be here with you at this important occasion for Merkaz. For those of you who don't know me, I recently became the president of the American Zionist Movement, of which Merkaz is a member. And the American Zionist Movement which I believe all of you probably know, has 39 disparate US Zionist organizations as its members. My personal background is I come from a community which originally had a very small Orthodox community and a very large conservative congregation nearby, which our family was very close to. In fact, when there was no minyan at the Orthodox synagogue, my father would go to the minyan at the conservative synagogue. So, as you know, we all help each other out in these ways. After becoming president of Amit, my first event that I went to in person was actually in Jerusalem, and I was invited to a gathering of the leadership of the conservative movement, which was convened by Yizhar Hess. I think Yizhar might be with you on the Zoom today. And I really appreciated getting to know some of the leadership at that time. And I thank Yizhar for inviting me to that. The most important task that I have as AZM president is to unite all our various groups, which represent the differing religious and political views, which, as was mentioned in speaking about Marilyn's time as part of the
Debbie froze.
Yeah, I think Deborah, I think her video froze. Deborah, if you can hear us, we lost you.
the question comes up, why recall all three of them and not just Abraham? And one reason that's been given for that is because each of our forefathers expressed their commitment to God in a different way. And each of these disparate ways are relevant and important to our continued strength as a people. No matter how our practices may differ, we are essential to the Jewish people, to its history, and to its continuity. I commend all of you at Merkaz, and particularly the outgoing officers under the leadership of outgoing President Marilyn Lind, for committing your time and effort to strengthening Jewish identity and continuing to impart to young Jews the importance and centrality of Israel as the rightful homeland of the Jewish people. Zionism is the movement of our people to return to our homeland, a factor that has kept our nation together for thousands of years and is as valid as any other movement for peoplehood. Let this be the cause of all our young people. To that end, and recognizing all of your efforts in this regard, I'd like to officially welcome and install your new leadership, Merkaz's new officers, Vice Presidents Eric Liederman, Rachel Russo, Sandy Starkman, Rabbi Jeremy Wiederhorn, and Treasurer Robert Sunshine, Secretary Rabbi Nolan Leibovitz. And I want to congratulate every one of the new officers and wish you much success in your work on behalf of Zionism. A special mazel tov to Richard Helfand, who is your new elected president, who I look forward to working with as you represent Merkaz, I'm sure quite as ably as Marilyn has done before you, and to continue to work with all the rest of you in moving Zionism forward for all of us. Thank you.
And we'd also like you to install all the board members whose names are now on our screen.
Oh, okay. I didn't have that, but I will get that right now. Okay, and
You don't necessarily have to read them. I think everybody can see them.
Okay, I'm very happy to welcome as members at large to your board, all of those who have been listed so ably by Naomi Adimendek and who you see on your screen in front of you. And I really wish all of you the greatest success in your endeavors for Merkaz and the Jewish people.
So, and we thank you, and we're really proud that you are the first woman president of the AZM, and we have enjoyed working with you over the first 5 months that you have been president, and look forward to a strong relationship between Merkaz and the AZM as we all move Zionism forward.
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for having me with you.
Okay. And now we're going to call upon somebody very special to our new president to install him, Rabbi Corey Helfand.
Thank you, Saray, and good afternoon to everyone. Wonderful to be with you all. Mazal Tov and Yashar Kochech to Marilyn for your leadership, for guiding us in a thoughtful way over the time of your term, and for leading our movement as a way of being able to continue to take a strong stand for progressive Zionism. Really an honor to be here to honor you. It is a pleasure to be here, both in my capacity as a rabbi in the conservative movement, as a member of Merkaz, as someone connected deeply to the movement in all of its walks of life throughout the world, to be able to be here to install Richard Helfand, not only in my capacity as rabbi, but more importantly, as my capacity as son. And it is an honor to be here to share a few words of Torah with you by way of this installation. So this coming week, we're going to read the very intense filled opening scene of Jacob on the run in Parashat Vayetze. And at the very end of this dream sequence with the sulam, with the ladder, the angels going up and down, Jacob wakes up in the morning having a lo yadati moment. I didn't realize I was in this place where God was. And he does something pretty chutzpahdik. He makes a neder, a vow with God. Vayidar Yaakov neder lemor, im yihye Elohim imadi ushmarani baderech hazeh, asher anochi holech. God, if you are with me during the path that I'm about to take, on the journey that I'm going to go on, and you take me back home, v'shavti b'shalom el beit avi v'haya Adonai li le'Elohim, and you bring me back peacefully, then you can be my God. Really, Jacob, you're making a vow with God that only then, if he does all of these things, that then you can enter into a relationship with God? The commentaries have a field day trying to understand what's actually happening in this moment. Some say, according to one midrash in Breshit Rabbah, that this entire sequence actually happened in a different order. We don't necessarily worry about when things happen chronologically, whether early or late, but that maybe things happened in a different way, that Jacob made this vow first as a way of saying, thank you, God, for saving me from what was about to happen with Esav, with my brother, while I was on the run. And then he had the dream, and God showed him what would be possible. But there's another commentary that perhaps suggests a different read. The Tzur Hamor, Rabbi Abraham Saba, one of the great Spanish commentators of the Middle Ages, suggests that what Jacob was trying to do here was figure out two different things. One, could he go on this journey having the merit of his ancestors behind him, Abraham and Isaac? Would they be able to carry him into what it was that he was about to do? But perhaps even more importantly, could he find the merit within himself to be able to navigate all that would come going forward? And I think I love both of these interpretations from the Tzur Hamor, because perhaps this is what is the challenge before us. Dad, you carry with you the merit of all of the thoughtful and courageous people who have led our movement of Merkaz, of Masorti Olami, of the conservative movement over the course of many, many decades and even generations. They're all there to support you in the work that you are about to do, and they will continue to be there as thought partners, as people who will encourage you, as people you can call on whenever you need. But I think also in this moment, it's important to remember that you also have your own merit that makes you poised to be able to show up in this moment and in the moments to come on the journey that you are going to take, even though you don't exactly know what's going to come and in what way it's going to unfold. But you should know that the merit of those who come before you and your own merit, as well as God's presence, will be there to guide you in wherever you go, v'shavti v'shalom, and to bring you back to a place of peace and wholeness in the continued work that you do to be able to support Merkaz and its vision, to be able to support your personal love as well as our collective love of the state of Israel, of working toward a more egalitarian home for all Jewish people, a place that celebrates pluralism, a place that really represents the beauty and the diversity of the Jewish people. But also remember the merit of that which exists within, your love of Yiddishkeit, your deep care for the movement, your profound capabilities to bring intellect and wisdom to all that you do with tremendous thoughtfulness. And of course, the love and support that comes from myself, from Mom, and from Ethan and David, who are all here rooting you on. Know that you go forward carrying the merit of those who came before you, of those who surround you right now, and also your merit. And because of all of those things, I know that as I install you as the new president of Merkaz, that you will bring us all back home, God willing, with peace for the Jewish people and the state of Israel. Mazal tov, and we love you. And now I get to tell my father that he's on mute.
He's still on mute.
No, I'm not. No, I'm back.
Okay.
I apologize. I'm a little teary-eyed. Corey always seems to know how to get to me, but in a good way. And I thank you for those very beautiful words. And I only hope I can live up to them as you and your brothers and your mother and your darling grandchildren, your darling children have done so for me. So thank you very, very much, Corey. I truly appreciate it. I also want to thank Debbie for introducing and inducting the new officers and board. And we look forward to working with Debbie and AZM in the coming years together for our mutual benefit. Since my childhood, programs associated with the conservative movement have played a key role in shaping my identity as a proud Jew, as a leader, and as a Zionist. Indeed, I credit my time as both a US wire and a Romanik as one of the key reasons why Israel holds such a special place in my heart and in my mind. It's fair to say that my growth as an advocate for Israel has followed right alongside the growth of the state of Israel itself. And I'm excited to enter into this role as we begin to reimagine the new era of advocacy and support for Am Chovshi B'Artzenu, a nation in our own land. I'm looking forward to working with each and every one of you, both familiar faces and new voices alike, as we seek to engage all in a strategic and guided effort to take Merkaz USA to the next level. I believe that together we have the opportunity to deepen our support for Israel, continue to engage with our many movement partners, and ultimately bring about the betterment of our homeland. I'm so grateful for the honor you've bestowed upon me in electing me to lead Merkaz USA. Both time and experience have taught us that there is much for us to do to further the mission of Merkaz USA. Our goals serve as the core structure of our mission. We seek to further the cause of true religious pluralism in Israel. We work daily to strengthen the connection between the people of Israel and Jews living in the diaspora through engagement opportunities and partnership. Still, it is crucial that we look back as we begin to think about moving forward. There are many lessons that we still must learn from the 2020 World Zionist Congress elections. We must strive to work more closely in cooperation with our movement partners. It should not, and indeed it cannot just be our way. There is innovation within collaboration, and our partners both domestically and internationally are our most valuable allies and colleagues in our work to elect representatives who will represent our needs within the World Zionist Congress. Additionally, we must increase understanding that Merkaz USA is the collective voice of our movement. And it is that collective voice that seeks to more fully engage organizations like the American Zionist Movement, Masorti Olami and Merkaz Olami, the World Zionist Organization, the Jewish Agency for Israel, Jaffe, and Keren Kayemet LiYisrael, Kakal. Merkaz USA should never feel as if it is sitting on the sidelines. We can achieve this through true stewardship and relationship building with our partners. We must work together to plan how we will engage our communities and ultimately overcome the recent push to the right, something that weakens the voices and influences of the conservative Masorti movements in world Zionist politics. Progress lies in the unity of our agenda and our willingness to compromise. We must never shy away from the difficult conversations that face us. And in developing a cohesive message and story, we will be able to promote Merkaz USA as a key player who always has a spot at the negotiating table. We have the ability to shape the story of what is vibrant in world Zionism and what it should be like. We must rethink how we reach our own constituents, growing our presence on social media, on college campuses, in our synagogues and elsewhere will only help us to engage new and diverse voices who are passionate about a vibrant egalitarianism presence inside Israel. We must meet people where they are, and we must understand that our allies may not just be those who fall within the conservative Masorti movements. As Brandeis historian Jonathan Sarna teaches, there are many streams of Judaism within the Jewish American community. Never forget that all these streams flow to the same river. There is strength in numbers and in allyship. We must utilize our already existing constituency base while also constantly seeking ways to bring new people into our membership. Our leadership, officers, and board members play a crucial role in helping to ensure the ongoing success of our everyday efforts, helping to maintain vibrant relationships with our partners. I'm so very grateful for all of the tireless work they do to further the efforts of Merkaz USA. But still, we cannot grow without engaging those who are not in attendance here today. We must engage in difficult conversations that foster relationships with younger generations, those in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. We must be open to hearing from those who might not view our organization with the same opinions as those who lead it today. Moreover, we must find audiences with whom we have never engaged. Raising the voices of the marginalized communities within our own communities is more important than ever. We must hold space for our LGBTQIA+ communities, Jews of color, and interfaith families as well. Everyone must be welcome within Merkaz USA. Engaging new voices in an authentic and open way will help us to meet them on their terms, address the Zionism that they are struggling with, and afford us opportunities to help make them feel welcome within the tent of our pluralistic Zionist movement. We must also be willing to accept that Zionism has changed. There is no such thing as a monolithic picture of, as my son calls it, the diasporic Zionist. Times and ideologies have changed, and so too must we. Never should we compromise on what makes us unique, but done and gone are the times where we cast aside voices that differ from our own. We must learn what pluralistic Zionism looks like today, and we must be willing to adapt for us to continue our work in the future. We must offer programming and educational opportunities that reflect the reality of Israel in the 21st century and how it relates to those of us here. While thousands of miles away, we can and should find ways to always feel connected to Eretz Yisrael and Klal Yisrael. Merkaz USA is the proud sponsor of Masorti on campus, helping to support Masorti activities and communities on college and university campuses. We look forward to continuing our Merkaz Reads Israel program in cooperation with Merkaz Canada, and are excited to be building a similar program around Israeli film under the same partnership. These are just a few of the ways we can build connections between diaspora Jews and the amazing writers, filmmakers, and artists in Israel and the Israeli of today. Earlier, we were privileged to hear from our distinguished panelists about today's Zionism, committed yet conflicted. I'm very proud of the conversation we had today, and I know that this is just the beginning of a broader conversation and of our expanded journey together. May our programming always seek to build bridges and grow understanding. Before concluding, I want to recognize some people without whom Merkaz USA would not be. Really and truly, these are the leaders who keep us afloat each and every day, and for whom I personally and all of us thank. To Marilyn Wind, our past president, for her forceful and thorough, thoughtful leadership of Merkaz over the last 5 years. We would not be where we are today without your efforts. And I, for one, am extremely grateful that you're leaving Merkaz USA in a better place today than when you first became president. We've made great strides during your presidency, and the shoes to fill are more sizable than I might ever understand at this point. Marilyn, I hope that you will allow me to call upon you for advice and assistance as I take over the reins of Merkaz. To all of the other officers and board members leaving the Merkaz board today, your leadership has been gratefully appreciated. And I want to add my personal thanks for all of your dedication and contributions to our efforts at Merkaz USA. To Rachel Russo, Rachel, I thank you for chairing our general council meeting, knowing all the things that you have currently going on with your family, and for your vision in helping us to develop today's thought-provoking program. To Naomi Adden-Mendek for so expertly shepherding us through our nominations process and helping us nominate a more streamlined board of directors for the very first time. And to Howie Goldberg, our media guru, for his superb assistance in helping us develop and implement our social media presence and coordinating the logistics of our program today. And certainly not last or least, I want to thank our executive director, Saray Crane, for her unwavering support and direction for all that is Merkaz USA. For those of you who may not know, Saray and I have known each other for 57 years. When we first met at Machane Ramah, Camp Ramah in the Berkshires, and later as board members in Metna USY when I was regional president. Saray, I am looking so forward to our next journey together and to your insightful direction at Merkaz USA. And finally, but certainly not least, I want to thank my family. To my wife, Vicky, for all of her support the past 41 years that allowed me to participate in my many extracurricular Jewish organizational activities. But most importantly, for making me laugh, including at myself, which was definitely needed, and for keeping me sane in the process. And to my children, Rabbi Corey and his wife Jenny, and my grandchildren Eden, Matan, and Jonah, my sons Ethan, without whose assistance these remarks today would not have been possible, and my soon-to-be Rabbi David and his fiancée Rebecca, for allowing me to see in you the value of all the time I have spent in the Jewish organizational world. It has all been worth it when I see how you have all turned into such dedicated, caring, thoughtful, and loving B'nai Yisrael, children of Israel. Your mother and I could not be prouder. A rabbi once asked his students, how do you know when night has ended and the day is about to begin? The students argued, searching for a correct answer. One said, can it be when you look in the distance and see two trees and you're able to tell that one's a fig tree and one is a palm tree? The rabbi said no. Another student said, can it be when you look in the distance and see two animals and you can discern one is a goat and one is a sheep? Then you know that night is ended and day is about to begin. Again, the rabbi answered no. He then explained, it is when you can look on the face of any man or any woman and there is a brother or sister. Because if you cannot do that, no matter what time of day it is still night. We at Merkaz USA are committed to ensuring a pluralistic Zionism, a pluralistic Israel. As the rabbi in the story said, we must see in each other a brother or sister, not a Jew who's on the right or the left, observant or secular. We must see in each other partners who want to achieve a vibrant Zionism that welcomes everyone to the table. With your help and with a recognition of the need to work together to overcome our differences, we will exceed in achieving that goal. My thanks to all of you for attending today, and I look forward to working together with you to create a new and more vibrant Merkaz USA. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. And that concludes our program. We encourage all of you to participate in our ongoing programs, for those of you who are not members, to join Merkaz, and we look forward to hearing from you. So thank you all for participating today, and Yasher Koach to our outgoing and to our incoming officers. And again, thank you to our panelists.
Bye, everyone. Have a good rest of your day.
Yasher Koach Hachem.